What up, YouTube? It's your boy Javon, and you're tuned into another edition of Context Matters. Before I jump into this latest time travel, I know somebody out here is trying to read and see all the faces on the t-shirts. Let me just take the time to get this out here. All right, so as you can see, all West Coast legends. Got the guy Nip on there, Neighborhood Nip, Cube, right? Tupacalypse, right? The Dogfather, Snoop Doggy Dogg, right? Easy E, and Dr. Dre. If I had it my way, 40 Water would be somewhere right on top of here, but I'm not the one that designed the shirt. I'm just rocking it. All right, so I figured I'd just get that out of the way, because if I were tuning in, me being from the soil that I'm from, I'd be like, man, who's all these individuals on the shirt? Let me just do a head count real quick. All right, so let's jump back into the DeLorean and time travel back to another memory that I had that, still resides within me, and from time to time I tend to reflect on. And so I'm going to title this piece JoJo Dancer. So let me preface this story by telling you why I'm deciding to call it JoJo Dancer. I was called by several nicknames up to this point in my life, but one of the names that most people called me when I was a little kid was JoJo. Stems from my first name, right? And so I went by JoJo when I was a little kid. Now, at the end of this particular tale, I'll tie in why I decided to call it JoJo Dancer, and to make a little bit more sense, right? And so the location of this particular instance was still at my grandmother's house. I was no more than 4 years old or so. I know I couldn't have been 5 because I wasn't at school. I wasn't in school age at that point in time. And I do remember that it had to be somewhere around November, early November, because it involved some trick-or-treating candy. So it had to be after Halloween, but not too many days past that. So I remember running around my grandmother's house, and my grandmother let me get some of the candy that I had got from trick-or-treating. And so I got a few pieces like any little nappy head kid, right? Had the candy, tried to go back, get some more candy, right? She told me I couldn't have any more candy, and she kind of took the brown paper bag and rolled up the top, put it on the counter, right? And I did like any mischievous little kid during that age, and waited for her to go into the other room. And then I thought I'd call myself sneaking, so I went, unrolled the bag, got myself a couple more pieces of candy, tried to sneak it out of there. But as I was coming out of the kitchen, my grandmother stood right there at the entryway between the kitchen and the dining room. Was like, "What's she doing?" Now, of course, nothing, I ain't doing nothing. Right, and I ran onto the porch and started eating the candy. So I remember my grandmother coming out there yelling at me, telling me that she told me I couldn't have any more candy, and she made me spit the candy that was in my mouth out. Right, so I remember having to climb up on to the little banister and spit the candy out over, and then she got mad at me because I spit the candy out into her little flower not bushes, her little flower garden that she had, because by that time she was in the gardening. So she was yelling at me about spitting it out into her plants. And so I took that scolding, whatever, carried on. And I remember at some point in time, about an hour or two later, coming back into the room, into the house, and went back in the kitchen, and I seen the bag still on the counter. So again, me not learning my lesson and thinking I was slick, I decided that this time I was just gonna reach in there and get a little piece of candy, little small pieces of candy that I could just conceal. And so I did that, and I went and I climbed up underneath my grandmother's dining room table. Now, this was an old school house, right? And this is in the early 80s. So my grandmother had a big dining room table and had a tablecloth on it, right? So I'm underneath there thinking that I'm covered, and I could see her feet and her legs coming up, and then her reaching down and pulling me up by my arm out from underneath the dining room table, right? And bumped my head as I'm standing up. And I still had the candy in my hand and all that good stuff. So she pinched my cheeks like this and made the candy come out of my mouth into her hand, right? So then she was like, you know what? I told you you're not supposed to have this candy, right? So she gave me a couple swats, and she went and took the candy, and she went and dumped the paper bag with the candy into the trash right there in front of me. It's like, you ain't getting no more candy, right? So she took that, dumped it in the trash, took the paper bag, kind of crumpled it up, threw it in the trash. And then to make sure that I didn't need the candy, she went onto the stove, and she used to, keep bacon grease. She used to keep grease in a little Folgers coffee can. After you get done frying the meat or whatever, you pour the grease in there. You can reuse the grease, what have you. So she took that and she poured it on top of the candy, right? So I'm standing there looking at it, and I'm crying. I'm mad because she done, gave me a couple licks, and she done pinched my cheeks up real tight, man. So I'm mad. And so I remember running and sliding back underneath the dining room table and just sitting under there crying. And so, I'm doing like any kid. I'm crying. And of course, she's, shut up before I give you something to cry about, whatever. So I'm there and I'm in my feelings and whatnot. And then I see her leave and go down the stairs. And so the way her house was, it was pretty much a 3-story. There was a middle floor where most of the bedrooms and the kitchen, dining room, living room was at. Then there was an upstairs, and there was a door that went downstairs to the downstairs or down to the driveway to get to the cars. So, at this point, I knew she was leaving. And so what happened was, I just remember being filled with anger and rage. And so I went and looked in the trash can. I seen the candy. I seen they had all the bacon grease and, grease and all that stuff on there. And so I knew that I couldn't get the candy. But the paper bag was just sitting on top of the grease because that was the last thing she threw in. And so what I did was I grabbed that brown paper bag out, right? And I went and I sat down on the couch. Now, at that point in time, my grandmother used to smoke. And so when I sat down, I noticed that she had some matches sitting next to the ashtray. And so what I decided to do, I know everybody at this point is like, oh, look at this little dummy. Right? Yeah, I admit it was a stupid thing to do, but I'm here sharing the story. Hey, God's my witness. This is how it transpired, right? To the best of my knowledge. And so, or recollection, I should say. And so I grabbed the paper bag, I grabbed the matches, and then I go underneath the kitchen table. The dining room table. Now, at that point in time, one of my older cousins was there in the house. And so I remember seeing her seeing her feet and her legs walking past, and I'm hiding up underneath the dining room table or what have you. She goes in the kitchen, comes back out, goes in the other room. And so I'm underneath there and I'm playing around with the matches. And so I know how at this point to strike and light a match, because my grandmother used to let me strike the matches in order to set the fire in the fireplace. So she had a fireplace in the house. And so I remember that one of the things I used to get excited about, she showed me what to do, is once we put the logs on there, once we put the little paper, twisted the paper up and put it in between the logs and a little bit of kindling on top, then she would let me strike the match. So I knew how to strike the match in order to make it light. So what I did was I was sitting there sulking, and I can remember really thinking about it, being, about 4 years old, really thinking about just striking a match and of course setting this little piece of paper on fire, right? Of course, I had no sense of forethought to see exactly what would be the outgrowth of those actions. But I remember sitting down there for a little while, and then finally I got the nerve to do it. And so I heard my grandmother come back into the house because I heard the downstairs door close. And so she has to come up the stairs. And so I started doing it real quick. So I start striking the match, trying to make the match light. And after 2 or 3 strikes, I struck the match and I lit the piece of paper right in my hand. And so, of course, the paper has a little bit of bacon grease on there, mind you, or whatever the grease was. So it immediately lights up, right? At that point in time, I had the little afro, I had a little Tito Jackson at that point in time. So it lights up real quick, right? And I hear my grandmother come up the stairs. So I panicked. So I moved the piece of paper. So the piece of paper lights the actual tablecloth. So the tablecloth is lighting. By that time, I get scared. I start screaming. Then I drop the paper, and the brown paper bag starts burning on the carpet. Right. So simultaneously, as soon as my grandmother opened the door to come back into the room from up the stairs. I'm bolting up from underneath the dining room table. The tablecloth is on fire. The brown paper bag is still burning on the carpet, and I'm screaming because I got a little bit of it on the front of my afro. It just singed me a little bit, right? So I run and I dive on the couch. 4 years old. That was my escape. I dive on the couch, bury my head into the couch pillows, and I'm sitting there crying. I remember my grandmother coming up like, "Boy, what the hell are you doing?" I heard the movement. I heard my cousin come out of the other room. She's asking what the hell happened. Blah blah. My grandmother goes and gets something to put the fire out. I believe it was water. She pulled the tablecloth off because the tablecloth is already burnt. By that time, I turn, I look, and I'm screaming, I'm crying, I'm yelling like I was on fire, right? Super scared, knew I was in trouble. So then my cousin sees the paper bag up underneath. They're still burning, so she runs and grabs some more water. She throws the water onto the paper bag and the rug because the rug was starting to catch on fire. Puts that out, right? My grandmother looks at me like I ain't never seen her look at me before, right? She come over, she grabbed me by my hair, and she started whooping me right there on the spot, right? Bam, 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 justifiable. I get it, right? She put me up against her knee and had me by my hair. So like I said, I had the afro and was whooping my butt, right? And so she made me go into the room, right? So after she gave me my licks, I go in the room, slam the door, jump on the bed, slide my head underneath the pillow, trying to just escape from the situation, terrified, mad, butt burning, side of the legs burning, you know what I mean? And so I'm in the room, I hear her cussing and fussing, and I don't really remember what she said, but I know she's yelling and screaming. And then I'm there, I start calming down. Few minutes, it could have been 5-10 minutes, it could have been a half an hour, but my uncle comes to the house. And the reason why I know he comes into the house because he comes in the house and I hear his voice, "Mama, what's all this smoke for? What's going on?" Yada yada yada, because he used to live right across the street at that point in time. And so, I don't know if he lived right across the street in that point in time. I know he lived across the street at some point, but he came over to the house. So I don't want to get the time frame mixed up. I know he came into the house. I hear her telling him at the top of her lungs what I did, which is to set the tablecloth on fire and to burn her rug up underneath the table, dining room table, with the paper, right? And so he comes in the room, he's pissed, he grabs me up, and of course I start screaming, freaking out. He grabs me, he gives me a whooping. Bam, 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 right? And my grandmother came in, my cousin came in, and they watched him give me a whooping. And after a while, she was like, "Oh, no, let him go. Let him go. All right, that's enough. That's enough. That's enough." So he gives me a whooping. And then it was customary. It was just like my little dungeon, right? The lights go out. The door closes up. Bam. So I'm in the dark, and I'm crying. And I got 2 whoopings in the course of maybe an hour or so, right? Legs is super raw, butt's raw, head still kind of throbbing because, like I said, she had a good little grasp of my hair. I had the little afro. Anybody that knew me during that point in time knew I had the afro, right? And so I'm there and I'm crying, and it's crazy because I remember thinking that I can't wait for my mom to come home. All I wanted was for my mom to come home. At that point in time, I don't know what was really running through my head, but I did at that point in my life view my mom as being my protector, right? Being the one that was always going to make everything all right. That's one of the things that women are able to do that's so magical and so beautiful, is to make a young child feel so loved and so protected. And so I remember laying there crying, "I want my mama," right? And every once in a while my grandmother would poke her head in there and be like, "Shut up, before I whoop you again," You get me all riled up again. I cry. I ended up falling asleep. Now, I know some time passed because that happened during the daytime. But when I hear my mom come into the house, it was dark because when I looked at the door, there was the hallway light on underneath the door, illuminating underneath the door. So that's how I know that some time had passed and it was nighttime. So when I hear my mom's voice, I instantly get up. And so I run to the door, and I'm opening the door to come out, and I hear my grandmother telling my mom what had happened, and like, look, Gloria, you see what he did to my damn rug, and that whole thing. And so in my mind at that point in time, I just remember being like, yeah, my mom's home now. You guys are gonna get it. And if you can put your mind into if you can allow yourself to travel into the mind of a 4-year-old, that's how you think, right? And so I remember my mom walking into the room and turning the light on. And at that point in time, I thought, yeah, you guys are going to get it because I'm telling my mom. So I remember telling my mom that they whooped me, that my grandmother whooped me, and that my uncle, Tone, whooped me. And I remember the very next sequence of events is something that, looking back now in hindsight, this was a pivotal moment for me. This is one of the things that caused the way that I viewed my mom to kind of change. Again, I felt like my mom was going to be the one that was going to be the savior, be the protector, come to my aid. And even in my own juvenile mind, I don't know what I thought she was going to do to my uncle or to my grandmother, but I thought that she was going to take up for me. But what ended up happening is that my mom went out and got a switch and came back in, and she gave me a whooping. And so I got 3 whoopings in one day over that instance of being a little pyromaniac and burning up my grandmother's tablecloth and burning a big old hole in her rug. But the thing that stuck out to me is that I remember feeling so disappointed and so angry when my mom whooped me, because I literally thought how it played out in my mind is that she was going to come and she probably was going to protect me tooth and nail with that same amount of ferocity that she did years ago when her and my grandmother got into it about my grandmother cutting off my hair. And so it might sound crazy, but I can't sum it up in any other way but to say that that moment I lost trust that my mother was going to protect me. And let's make no mistake about it, in no way, shape, or form am I trying to say that she should have done anything different to that. As a 43-year-old man, I can look at it from this angle and see that she did exactly what most people would do. But I'm telling you that I was self-aware at that point, and I was able, and I am still able, to understand how I felt in that moment. And I almost felt betrayed. I think betrayed is probably the closest word that I can come up with to sum up how I felt. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. I did begin to harden my heart against my mom. Call it being spoiled, call it being a little rugrat, call it being an ingrate, just call it just being a little kid and not having a good grasp of the things that was going on. But one thing that I do know is I know myself. And I know that in that particular space, in that small little juvenile knucklehead body, I literally started to develop a distrust for my mom and a feeling of vulnerability that would surface time and time and time again. This particular instance, like I said, looking back at it, she was 1,000% right the way in which she handled it. It's one of those things I've told my kids, like I got 3 whoopings for this instance. And so I get it. But what I'm trying to convey to you who are listening to this at this point is that there are moments that I'm going to share with you about my life and about my past that I've been able to analyze, I've been able to pinpoint, and I've been able to look really, really with a great deal of clarity and with an understanding that these things help to shape exactly who I became as a young man and ultimately who I've become as a well-seasoned man. And so I decided to call this one JoJo Dancer. One, because I think it's cool to kind of just give it a little subtitle or something to kind of captivate the mind, like, oh, where's he going with this story? Kind of lightens up the mood of it, because some of the stuff that I'm going to share with you guys is like really, really heavy, right? But I called it JoJo Dancer because one of the characters that Richard Pryor played, or who he talked about in one of his stand-ups, was JoJo Dancer, and there was a movie around that whole character, right? And so my nickname at that point in time was JoJo, right? Richard Pryor was famous for his afro. He was also famous for smoking, freebasing, smoking, and catching his own self on fire, catching his afro on fire, and all that. So there's some wordplay with that, right? I really singed the little front part of my little Tito Jackson afro, and so I felt it applicable to title this thing JoJo Dancer because, drawing in the elements that Richard Pryor made a huge mistake, almost killed himself, right? At that age, I made a huge mistake. Could have been a lot worse than what it was. And so I'll leave it there. Thank you for rocking with me. If you made it this far, thank you for lending an ear. Thanks for bending the ear to me and hearing my story. Until the next episode, I just want to say peace. Thank you. I'm out.